I don't think you can overstate the importance of strength training. I just don't think there's anybody out there who shouldn't be lifting weights. I mean, unless you're decidedly saying, I don't want to live the longest, healthiest life I can. If that's the case, then by all means, don't lift weights. But if you're in the camp that says, I want to maximize how well I can live and maybe even how long I can live, what should I do? Then you have to be lifting weights regardless of age, regardless of sex. You have to work around all of those things.
I think exercise is the single most important longevity drug we have, bar none. If you said, like, I want to go deep down the rabbit hole of living longer, what do I need to do? It's like a super well-crafted exercise program that is geared towards strength, muscle mass, and cardiorespiratory fitness. And the data are unbelievable, right? Everybody knows that if you smoke or have diabetes, your risk of death goes up a lot. But your risk of death from having high cardiorespiratory fitness goes down by much more than your risk of death goes up from smoking or diabetes. So smoking and diabetes will double or triple your risk of death, depending on the time frame you're looking at. Having very high cardiorespiratory fitness, so having a VO2 max that is elite, we would define that as the top 2.5% of the population, compared to below average, is a 5-fold reduction in all-cause mortality. I mean, we don't have drugs that have a 5x reduction in mortality. And then when you layer in strength and muscle mass, we actually now have pretty good data as to the fact that strength is more important than muscle mass. We just use muscle mass as a good proxy for strength, but if you just focus on strength, that's the metric that matters. It's about a 3-fold reduction in all-cause mortality when you compare high strength to low strength. And the tests are, we're talking, it's not like how much you can squat and deadlift. It's like grip strength, dead hang, how long can you do like an air squat? Like what's your quad strength? How quickly can you do 5 reps up and down from a chair? I mean, it's relatively simple stuff. But when you stratify people by those metrics and you compare the highest to the lowest performers, there's just no comparison.
Truthfully, I haven't come up with a better analogy yet. And it's really the analogy of saving for retirement. If you could be talking to somebody who's in high school or college and you were talking to them through the lens of, being a financial advisor, their fiduciary, what would you say? Well, you would say, listen, there's this really magical thing called compounding that Einstein basically said was the 8th wonder of the world, and you want to use it to maximum advantage. And to do that, you should start saving immediately. You just, if you put all of your savings into an index fund at the age of 22, the probability that you are not going to be set when you retire is so low. But what happens if you're talking to somebody who's 45 and due to life circumstances, like they just haven't been able to save. They haven't made enough money to even have some disposable saving income, or they've had, they've saved and lost or invested badly or something like that. Would you say, well, too bad? No, of course you wouldn't. So I guess the point here is it is never too late to start saving for retirement, but you must understand something, which is the longer you wait to start, the more you're likely going to have to save, the greater return you're going to need, and therefore probably the greater risk you're going to take. It's never too late to start saving, and it's never too late to start exercising. Don't wait. An amazing statistic is that the leading cause of traumatic brain injury in people over the age of 65 is falling. 95% of hip fractures are driven by falls. So, clearly frailty is the leading cause of this. Frailty means poor muscle mass, poor reactivity, and low bone density. Those are probably the things that are driving the severity of the fall, which are so much higher in a person who's older than, a person who's younger. If you or I step off a curb we weren't expecting to be there, or, when you're stepping from one level to another and the level is different than you expected, that immediately destabilizes you. Well, the ability to react to that very quickly and get a firm footing, that is a very power-driven movement, right? That's not really about how strong you are. It's actually about how explosive and powerful you are. That is a type 2 muscle fiber phenomenon. And as you watch the atrophy of those 2 fibers, you have far less reactive speed in your feet, and therefore you're more likely to fall in response to that. And so again, the more we can train these systems, the better we are going to be able to resist falling. Research is very consistent here in demonstrating that resistance training can increase muscle strength and muscle hypertrophy at any age. even if you limit your analysis to people over the age of 80, which are people who are clearly in that area of being on the downhill for strength and hypertrophy, training can offset losses, and in a deconditioned individual can actually make gains. I don't think you can overstate the importance of strength training. I just don't think there's anybody out there who shouldn't be lifting weights. I can't think of a case. I mean, unless you're decidedly saying, I don't want to live the longest, healthiest life I can. If that's the case, then by all means don't lift weights. But if you're in the camp that says, I want to maximize how well I can live and maybe even how long I can live, what should I do? Then you have to be lifting weights regardless of age, regardless of sex, regardless of injury. You have to work around all of those things. There was a study that looked at people in their late 70s and early 80s and people in their 20s that measured 3-rep max for leg extension and then put them on a 6-week resistance training program. And the people in their late 70s and early 80s had a 78% increase in their strength, which is almost identical to the 84% increase that was found in the younger individuals. Again, it's important to understand that, yes, these people were significantly different in the absolute strength that they had, but nevertheless, this is an important point that is everybody has the capacity to improve, and therefore everybody needs to be doing this. I think we've talked about this with Andy Galpin on a couple of occasions, the importance of type 2 fibers. So one of the things that Andy said that has always stuck with me, and I think it's just such a great way to think about this. He almost described it as a hallmark of aging is the atrophy of the type 2 muscle fibers. So again, you have type 1 fibers, you have type 2 fibers. The type 2 fibers are the glycolytic fibers. They are the much more powerful fibers. They have more contractile force. They're the ones that are responsible for power, not just muscle size and not even just strength, and clearly not muscular endurance. And these are the things that basically peak when we're in our 20s. And so, every day I'm sort of thinking about what am I doing to preserve them and minimize their loss. And again, a study we'll link to demonstrates that type 2 muscle fiber cross-sectional area was increased by 27% in men aged 60 to 73 with 13 weeks of resistance training. Now, again, you have to train relatively heavy for your level of strength. You have to push to make those results happen. And remember, training is a hormetic activity, right? It has to create a stimulus, whether that be on the aerobic system, whether that be for the type 1 fiber, the type 2 fiber, like there has to be a stimulus that comes from pushing outside of a comfort zone. So we have to have that training stimulus, but we know that if we do too much, we're going to get injured. And I hope that by now I've made the case for why injury must be avoided at all cost, because injury means time to decondition. And the older we get, the more problematic that gets. Again, I think about the back injury I sustained when I was 27 years old that basically left me unable to walk for 3 months and unable to do much of anything for 9 months. Well, today, if you look at me, there's really no lasting effect of that. But imagine that had happened to me when I was 70. That's it. My life is over. Like, I never get back to where I was. So it's probably safe to say that the most common reason for injury when you're starting out is progressing along the intensity axis too soon. So remember, we talked about how you push frequency, you can push duration, you could push intensity. I think you want to err on the side of, again, my heuristic is move the frequency, then the duration, lastly, the intensity. So that's clearly true on the cardio training side, but I think it's also true on the strength training side. Obviously, another very important part of injury is just a lack of neuromuscular control. So that accounts for many things, from why people fall more frequently as they age to how people get injured when they can't, if we're just limiting it to talking about strength training, why are individuals getting hurt when they're lifting weights? Well, a lot of it is maybe they're moving a weight that they can't control. We've talked a lot about the importance of being able to control the eccentric phase of a movement. And I think we've all seen someone in the gym who's just throwing weights around and getting away with it, but that you're going to stop getting away with that the older you get. So we want to really make sure that people have the coordination. They're doing the types of drills like agility ladders, hand-eye coordination exercises, ball tosses, such that they're kind of generating neuromuscular control in addition to strength. Probably the other big area where we see injuries is due to a lack of movement variability. People say, well, do I need to squat and deadlift and bench press? And I think the short answer is no. I think a lot of those things can be done with, for example, squats and deadlifts. You can accomplish many of those goals using single leg variants that are far less weight. And even something like a bench press with a bar, I would much rather substitute in once you're ready for that, floor presses and single arm floor presses. So you'll have one arm, you'll be laying on the floor with knees up, feet flat on the ground, one arm straight up, the other arm doing the presses. And again, what's nice about that is on a floor press, yet your range of motion is nowhere near what it is on a bench, because you're obviously not going to be able to bring the elbow, below your back, which you could on a bench. So you lose a bit of range. It's clearly not as good a, quote unquote, as good a pec exercise. But there's also a very good margin of safety there. Think about how much harder it is to hurt yourself doing a floor press than a regular traditional bench press. So, these are just some slight examples of ways that you can think about minimizing injury